Hi everybody, welcome to the Civil Restoration webinar on high cost family processes. I am Louise Cowell, the Operations Manager for the High Cost Family team, and I'm joined by my colleague John Campbell, who is a team manager on the team. In terms of what we're going to go through today, we'll give you a bit of an introduction of what we're going to cover, give you an overview of the recovery and restoration process, the reconciling of our contingency submissions, cover a bit on supportive action to support you guys and how to contact us, as well as seeking your feedback. So the purpose of the webinar is to demonstrate the high cost family approach to recovery and restoration. And by the end of it, we are hoping that you will have an understanding of how we as a team will be reconciling contingency submissions on CCMS, what you will need to do with your future submissions, and the forums for assistance with complex cases and how to contact us. So I'm next going to give a bit of an introduction to the team and talk a little bit about our intakes and then what we see when we are in a business as usual state. So our level 2 contingency measures were invoked on the eve of the 13th of June 2025. And since that date, we've received more than 16,000 items. We've received more than 7,000 case plans, processed around about 5,800 case plans. And during this time, our weekly average intake has been around 270 case plans. Under business as usual, it takes around 45 minutes to process a case plan, but under contingency, it is taken around about 2 hours and 15 minutes. So as you can see, significantly longer. And this is due to how we review and access the documents that we need to put in place an agreement. It's not as simple as it is with CCMS. It's a lot more challenging. It takes a lot more, and there's a lot more administrative work to carry out as part of the contingency process. Under business as usual, from the period May to November, I estimate that we would have received around about 20,000 case plans. So you can see when you compare with the totals that we've received under contingency, there's around about 13,000 case plans that we've simply never received. We don't know when we're going to receive these, if we're actually going to receive them. So any intel that you could provide on that from the perspective of a provider would be much appreciated, just to help us plan. Intakes have been significantly lower during contingency, as I've mentioned above, but we are expecting this to drop off and to fluctuate as we move back to a business as usual state. In terms of our resourcing levels, we have taken on additional resource to support with an anticipated surge in work whenever this will come. We've replaced 3 members of the team who recently left. We've taken on 3 additional team members, and there's 2 further people going to join us in the coming weeks. We are very confident in our resourcing levels moving into the recovery period, because we have taken on extra staff to bolster this, and we are putting other plans in place in terms of other areas of work to make sure we've got sufficient coverage and can move resource as and when needed, depending on what we are seeing. I'm now going to give a very high-level overview of our restoration and recovery process, and then I'll be handing over to John to talk about this in depth. So in terms of our approach, the main point I want to get across is that everything you have sent to High Cost Family under contingency is going to be uploaded by the High Cost Family team to CCMS. You will not have to do this. The reason we are doing this is to make sure we've got accurate records of the system, making sure we can reconcile with things that might already be there and additional submissions that have come in. We'll also be performing final checks against the existing records, against the certificate, to make sure there is sufficient scope for the work that's going to be carried out, and just to make sure everything is checked to ensure that we can put the agreement on and increase the cost limit. And this is also going to minimise the impact on providers as well. Our hope is that you guys can go on, you can see that your case plan agreement is there, and then any additional work you need to do is simply adding to whatever has been done, whether that is an additional stage of a case plan or submitting a bill for payment. So I'm now going to hand over John, who is going to cover the reconciliation of contingency submissions in further detail.
Hello, my name is John Campbell. I'm a team manager for the High Cost Family Team, and as Louise says, I'm going to cover the reconciliation of our contingency submission and process. First, just highlighting our priorities over contingency. The important thing for us to do was to assess the case plans to get agreed costs in principles, and that was for to ensure that the providers had the cover and were not working at risk during that contingency period. To respond to general correspondence, so any queries regarding the contingency process, and how to proceed under that process, and get the CCFS case fee scheme or events default limitations and contracts in place in principle, and again that's to minimize the risk to your costs. So going on to the recovery. When the internal access was restored for the LAA, we looked at how we could move things forward. We looked at clearing the backlogs first for CCMS cases that were received prior to the outage and where there was no contingency case plans received. Our first item was to clear the backlog of CCMS cases where no contingency case plan was received, and that's just to get the information back on the provider side of the system in readiness for restoration for yourselves and for those to be processed as and when required. Increase the CCMS cost of contracts received for default costs for 32.5 or £60,000, regard whether it's one council or two council. From the 6th of October, we started to transfer our decisions onto CCMS when we were dealing with the contingency emails, and that was in readiness for the system restoration for the providers, and then we could get those decisions sent off under CCMS and then start to go back to business as usual on those cases. And we also were inputting the registrations on CCMS within that period. When full access was restored, and that was not so long ago, we continued to work through the email backlogs. It's important to clear those contingency backlog case plans and also work on the system to continue and move towards business as usual. And on full restoration, we're completing final checks on agreed case plans. So as Louise mentioned, that is just looking at whether there's the scope on the case plan, just making sure that the information that had been provided to us matched what was on the case plan. I know under the start of contingency that providers couldn't necessarily get all the documentation together to send to us that we required to carry out our assessment, and so it's just to reconcile the information that you sent us to what was actually on the certificate and make sure that any agreement that we put in place in principle, we could then move forward and agree it as a final cost. We are increasing the cost limits on the certificates, and that is to reduce the administrative pressure on yourselves and return the case plan task to you. And as I mentioned, that is to work towards business as usual. And in the coming weeks, months, we will look towards closing contingency for the final time.